On today's show, we talk to three-time Grammy nominee John Daversa, a renowned jazz trumpeter, composer, arranger, producer, and band leader. We talk about how he developed from childhood, how he learned his compositional and arranging craft, his favorite trumpet players, his three-time Grammy-nominated big band album Kaleidoscope Eyes, Music of the Beatles, his most recent album Wobbly Dance Flower, and much, much more. Stay tuned, you're listening to The Nikhil Hogan Show. Hello and welcome back to The Nikhil Hogan Show. Our guest today is three-time Grammy nominee John Daversa, a versatile and internationally respected performer, composer, arranger, producer, band leader, educator, and BFM jazz recording artist. He's the winner of the Herb Alpert Award, the Dave Joel Miller Award, the National Trumpet Competition, the ITG Jazz Soloist Competition, and finalist in the Thelonious Monk International Jazz Competition. He has performed on world stages such as The Today Show, Late Night with David Letterman, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Live Aid at Berlin, Hamburg Music Festival, Java Jazz Festival, so many great venues. He has also had the opportunity to perform or record with artists such as Fiona Apple, Michael Bublé, Dori Caymi, Andraé Crouch, Sheryl Crow, Herbie Hancock, the Bob Mintzer Big Band, and the Yellowjackets. In 1996, he founded the John Daversa Progressive Big Band. Junkwagon, the big band album, released in 2011, won Best in Show and Awards of Excellence in Creativity, Originality, and Production in the Global Music Awards. In 2016, Daversa released Kaleidoscope Eyes, Music of the Beatles, a big band album with an orchestra of almost 60 featuring vocal artists Renee Olstead and Catisse Buckingham. The album was nominated for 3 Grammy Awards for Best Large Jazz Ensemble Album, Best Arrangement, Instrumental or A Cappella, and Best Arrangement, Instrumental, and Vocals. His latest album is Wobbly Dance Flower, released 2017, featuring Bob Mintzer. As an educator, Daversa earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in music from the University of California, a Master's of Fine Arts degree in Jazz Studies at California Institute of the Arts, Doctor of Musical Arts degree in Jazz Studies at the University of Southern California. After teaching at both USC and California State University Northridge, he is now the chair of studio music and jazz at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
I really wanted to start right at the beginning. You mentioned that your mom was a classical pianist and your dad was a trumpet player who played with Stan Kenton and his orchestra. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You said when you first read music, you used to sing the notes first before actually playing them.
You've been reading up on me.
How important is singing for a musician? And I'm not talking like Mariah Carey, but just, singing notes with your voice.
I think it's crucial. I'm so grateful for that experience to have really allowed music to come into me and out of me through the voice first. It's the most organic. It's the closest instrument to our body, to state the obvious, and there's something to that. And it is unforgiving in the fact that you can play an instrument like a piano and press down a key and you can make it sound pretty good. But with the voice, you really have to know the sound that you want to create. There's so much more of a concept that has to be there at the genesis of sound creation. So it keeps you honest from the very beginning as a beginner. When I was learning to read notes on the page, you have to know what those sound like. You can't just fake it. So that really helped me further on when I started working with more instrumental formats.
When you're singing, did you just sing notes or did you use solfege, like a movable do or a fixed do?
When I was starting, I didn't use solfege. That I learned later as an adult musician, and that really solidified a lot of what I was already doing. But I wish that I had learned solfege. A movable do, I think, is most appropriate for what we're doing. Otherwise, you might as well just call them the names of the notes we call them in Western music here.
Did you have perfect pitch as a child?
No. I always had really good relative pitch. And I have that thing that a lot of musicians have, just a really strong relative pitch where you can, if I hear anything on the trumpet, certainly I know what note it is. And if I can sing it, I kind of know where it resonates. And I remember when I was in college, I had a Fender Rhodes right by my door where I would go out and in. And I'd play an A natural every time I walked in and every time I walked out. And so I always knew what a natural was just by positioning myself. That's kind of the thing. I don't have perfect pitch.
Your dad was a trumpet player. Was he very interested in your musical upbringing? Was he free with you, or did he want you to do exercises and practice and do that kind of thing?
My dad, he, I think both my parents were, they're pretty open people. I think they just, their philosophy, they just want their kid to be happy and thriving and contribution to society. That's the thing. And whatever the platform is, doesn't matter. I think they also saw, an inherent gift, a talent with me that they certainly encouraged. And even more than that, I think they saw that I had a love for it. So that's why they, were certainly encouraging. But they were not the kind of parents that try and run me around to different talent shows, and it was more just watching my own energy and passion, and them being professional musicians. If anything, I think they just really wanted me to be realistic about how I went about making a living for myself.
Did you have like a teacher? The trumpet requires you to be a little bit older, right? To have the breath control to actually start blowing. So were you playing other instruments as a kid?
I was, although I think you can start trumpet pretty early too. I mean, my dad was a bit of a child prodigy. He started playing trumpet when he was 4.5.
Oh, wow.
And as legend goes, I think he practiced every morning, 6 o'clock in the morning for an hour since he was 4.5 years old. He just loved it.
I wanted to ask what other instruments you played as a child, and then after that, did you take lessons from like anybody as you were growing up?
Well, I sang, of course. I put on records and just sang and sang and sang and sang. I was, listening to the Beach Boys and Stevie Wonder and Willie Nelson, and these things just filled me up like filling up a balloon. It made me feel alive. I would sit in my room and I had some drumsticks. I remember it so vividly, just playing to Earth, Wind and Fire, playing on pillows and pots and pans, just playing drums, and I played piano too, but nothing all that structured until later. And then I started playing trumpet, I think in middle school, 6th grade, sounds right. And I just played in the concert band, and Dad was always there to ask questions too, but we never had formal lessons. I think he was hip enough to know that family dynamic. If he would have pushed me, I probably would have repelled. The times when I was also insecure, as a beginning instrumentalist, and your dad is this professional trumpet player. So I never wanted to play around him. I mean, that was my own thing, and he was cool about it, but I never wanted to hear him sound, I never wanted him to hear me sound so bad. And he was still going to LA in the summers when we lived in Oklahoma in the Midwest there. And so for those summers, I would practice all day long. For 3 months, I practiced probably 8-10 hours a day. And then he would come back and say, "Oh, okay." and then I felt better about playing around him. So I had to get over that hump. I didn't really have a formal teacher. I mean, honestly, I never really have. I just figured stuff out on my own, and I had really great resources to go to when I had questions.
Did you buy sheet music? Did you try and transcribe things off the record? What was your approach to building like a sort of a vocabulary?
Mm. I had listened to, growing up, I listened to a lot of pop. I didn't listen to jazz. And I loved pop and country, and I loved listening to the production value of everything, all those clean sounds and the funny lyrics and all of that. And then later when I got into jazz, I would just listen, I would absorb, and I would try to listen to just about any soloist that was not a trumpet player, because I wanted just to simulate vocabulary that was not idiomatic to my instrument.
Who are players, non-trumpet players, who really resonate with you throughout your life? Just non-famous ones. Give me three.
Oh, a lot of guitar players, John Abercrombie, Schofield, Pat Metheny, Mike Stern, and saxophone players. That in the 80s, it was Michael Brecker, and Bob Mintzer and Bob Berg, and that whole 80s fusion movement, Bass Desires. I loved listening to drummers like Peter Erskine, and I was very much into that whole scene, and the Yellowjackets, of course. So I never, at that age, I didn't transcribe a lot of, on paper. I did a few, but I would try and just learn the solos by ear, and really try and simulate the sound and the time and the phrasing and the accents to really just match that personality, and just let it go inside instead of spending too much time just writing it down. Because I figured that was more of an intellectual exercise. I wanted it to go into my body.
You mentioned there was one album, Stan Kenton, his orchestra, the jazz compositions of D. Barton. You mentioned this album is pretty influential on you. Could you talk a little bit about it, and in what way? Was it the writing of, like, were you really listening to the arrangements and everything?
Yeah, the writing for sure. The only reason I knew of that record is because my dad had played on it. He and Ray Reid were the main soloists on that record, which I love the concept of that record because there were two soloists through the whole thing. It was really featuring a particular sound. And that was 1968, 1969. And the writing was just it was very free jazz influenced. And so, and Stan Kenton played, I think, on one tune. There's one tune that's kind of 3-6-2-5 oriented, the Singing Oyster. The arrangements are very free, and the solos are just bass and drums and very, kind of an Ornette Coleman Shape of Jazz to Come influence. And it was just so free. It's just so free. It was liberation. And yet all of the writing is also, the melodies are very singable. They're very relatable. There's nothing that's there to make you stutter step, but it's still got this sophistication on the bottom. And D. Barton wrote so big. And in that time, Stan Kenton usually wrote for a very brass, a low brass heavy instrumentation. He had a bass saxophone, baritone, two tenors and one alto, and then he had 10 brass with tuba. Plus the bass, and it's just a very bombastic sound. And the thing that I also loved about it in a very macro sense is that as chaotic as the improvisations might get, they could go anywhere, split, splat, or whatever it may be, and then they always had a landmark of where they were coming back to the structure. So the polarity was evenly balanced. As chaotic as they got, they balanced that with very defined structural landmarks. So I always try and write that way, so it's really in balance.
Well, how old were you when you were listening to these records? Were you already in your jazz band in middle school and onwards?
Yeah, I didn't really understand it until I was in high school. Probably I was 16, 17, and I went, oh, okay, I get this.
Did you start to write scores for big bands in high school or even earlier? When did you start to write, like take staff paper and start doing your own arrangements? Were you young when you started doing that?
Not too young. I started maybe, my first year of high school. So you're 14 or 15. Just started writing tunes. And I'd written songs before that. I was writing more kind of pop and R&B songs with lyrics. But then in high school, I started writing tunes. And then I wrote for a big band when I was in high school. I wrote a few arrangements, just trying things out and experimenting. There was a great band to work with, and my band director Sid Lassane was wonderful in letting me bring in stuff.
How do you make that leap? Did you read a textbook, or you knew how to read? Obviously, your mom was a classical pianist, right? And you mentioned she played Chopin, Rachmaninoff, just great classical music. When it came to writing and learning to notation and all that, how did you learn all of that?
I think just I learned from learning how to play trumpet. You learn how to read music, and so I was also writing down melodies as well as reading the melodies. So it went back and forth, and you just keep developing in that way. I think, in terms of the progression of it, one thing I'm very grateful for is that I don't think I had a lot of fear in its, just trying stuff out. So, I just wrote stuff and you hear it back and you go, that didn't work. That worked. It's the consistency of doing it all the time. It's interesting. Sometimes I think that beginning writers or writers that don't have a lot of experience, there's a sense of just waiting for that divine intuition to come, and sometimes that happens. But it's just like practicing an instrument. It needs to be a disciplined practice where you write every day. You write every day. Write a song every day. Write 4 bars every day. It's a muscle that you have to create a regiment with. And when I was in I think when I got out of my undergraduate degree at UCLA, I set aside the mornings to write every day. 6 o'clock in the morning I started, and I would go till about noon every day. No matter if I had something I was working on or I had a list of things I wanted to do. I haven't written a fugue yet. How do you do that? Let's figure it out. And I would just jump in and go for it, make myself do it.
So you really put like a block of time. You blocked off time, and you said, "I'm going to write." And did you have goals for yourself? Do you say, "I'm going to write this," or "I'm going to write that," or did you give yourself? Because you seem like a very self-didactic sort of person. Like do you have a structure for yourself in how you want to work at things?
Yeah, when I was younger, I had more time to devote to these things. So usually there was a fire underneath me to write some thing that was in my head. So I was always working on that, uh, and then there were also times where I don't know what I want to write today. Here it is, 6 o'clock a.m. But I had a list that I would keep. A brainstorming list. I've never written a string quartet, so let's start working on that string quartet. And so I would, with that, that's a big subject, and I listened to a lot of the canonic string quartets. I'd listen to, all the Bartok string sextets and Brahms, and just get the sound in my head. I would wake up with it and fall asleep with it. And I remember, spending a good few months just listening to the late string quartets of Beethoven, just over and over, just getting that immersing in that sound. And then I would look at the scores and try and see how it was that he was creating those emotions and those expressions and those sounds, and then just start trying stuff out.
How did you learn harmony? What did you learn harmony organically, just listening to records and learning it, like perhaps song by song, chord by chord, and building a basis of knowledge? Or did you follow a textbook, or did you have a teacher for that?
Well, I'm still learning harmony. I suppose it is fairly organic. There aren't a lot of textbooks that I can point to where I can tell you, yeah, I studied this book and that book. I've taken things from this and that, but it's really about the application. I mean, I would, you go through the American Songbook, the real book, and just play through. I remember, that's one thing my dad did when I was, probably 12 years old. He's taught me how to play 2-5-1s on the piano.
So your dad can play piano?
Yeah, he can play through tunes, and he actually just played a show on piano as the musical director where he is now. So he's a pretty accomplished piano player. But he showed me how to do that, and so I could read through, real book tunes, playing 2-5-1s, and then you start hearing people talk about harmony. I grew up with a guitar player friend of mine, Justin Morell, and we were really tight when we were growing up, and so he was always talking about different voicings on the guitar, and we would geek out and try and put it on the piano, and just experimentation. And of course I would go to clinics and hear people talk about how they approach, using the melodic minor scale and all the tools of the craft, and then do my best to see how I could break the rules.
When you write, do you write with a piano or with a trumpet, or how do you write when in those big blocks of writing time? Do you just have a pen and paper or pencil and paper?
Oh, I pine for the days of pen and paper, pencil and paper. It doesn't happen all that often. I'll work backwards on that question. These days, time is just such the element, and I don't have very much time to write. And so, most of the writing is done on an airplane at this point, or in transit, or singing stuff on the phone. And thankfully, I've had enough experience orchestrating and writing where I have a good idea, how to get a certain sound in my head onto the paper. So I don't have to really do the trial and error so much. It's more about the big concept and the macro design. Right now, it's a lot of it is not with a piano, not with a trumpet. It's just trying to imagine and then doing my best to get it on the paper the way I'm imagining it. Before that,
wait a second. So wait, you're building it in your head. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's this continual evolution process in my head. It's the 5 minutes before I go to sleep, where I'm, oh yeah, maybe that phrase, needs to be a little bit more over the bar line. I can hear it differently like that, and then, you sing it in your phone so you remember, how you were hearing it.
You use like a voice memo on your phone and just like record lines and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have written entire pieces that have just been freely improvised, sung. I've just sung it in my phone, and then I just transcribe it in a way, and then and then massage it and edit it along the way, and then orchestrate it. And there's something so organic and pure about that, because that's just the way that it unfolded so naturally, without trying to adhere to any preconceived form. And then there are other things where you really need that formal structure, because you have the one cool element, and then what do I do with this? Well, okay, let's put it on top of a rondo form. Got it. Okay, then it becomes this whole other variation. So you're always playing with kind of what I was talking about before with the D. Barton suite. It's chaos and structure, keeping that balance together.
Do you use technology in the sense like, would you use like a Dorico or a Sibelius to put notation in?
Yeah, I'm putting stuff right into Finale, just because of the time element. I'd much prefer using pencil and paper, but it's just not a realistic thing for me right now. Because then I would have to transfer it onto Finale after. So I don't have that luxury.
Let me ask you this question: who are your favorite composers?
Stravinsky, Prokofiev.
And okay, let's start with Stravinsky. What would you name a couple of pieces and just tell me why you like Stravinsky?
Oh, the ballets. I love the early ballets. I mean, Petrushka is one of my favorites. And Rite of Spring, of course. It's just so, I mean, you listen to Rite of Spring and you go, what the hell is going on? And it just all makes sense at the same time. I love that feeling of knowing that this is just, and it's melodic too. There are melodies, there's singable melodies. And then this undertow of this is way above what I can even comprehend. All these time signatures happening at the same time, and plus two different keys happening at the same time. Yet it all goes together in this just almost like sacred geometry. So and plus there's a meaning behind it too. With the ballets, there's a story behind what all these characters are playing, and with the instruments, and I don't know, it's just so complex and so simple at the same time.
And did you study those scores and take a deep look at them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I still, I mean, it makes me want to go back to it, and just talking about it now makes me want to go to the library right now and open it up.
Does music give you goosebumps? Like when you listen to a great recording, does that give you just a physical great reaction? Or if you're listening to your band rehearsing or playing your music, do you get that physical sensation?
I think that's what we're all striving for. When I write, when I play, that's what you hope you might get to that point again. I have an exercise that I do with my graduate composition class here at Frost. One of the first things that we do so we can remember why we do this. Because one day I was sitting on a plane actually, and I just started writing down every piece of music that I can remember that gave me goosebumps, and I call it the goosebump music. And I just started making this list, stream of consciousness, and I got to about page 8. Single space, because one thing just leads to the next remembrance, and the computer ran out of battery, and that's the only reason why I stopped. And that started to fill me up with that feeling of, just a love of being a musician and being around sound and music and what it can do.
You mentioned Prokofiev. So what pieces do you like from Prokofiev?
Oh, I mean, all the Prokofiev, the symphonies. It's what's the one that he wrote when he was in exile in Russia, and was it 7? I think, I don't remember now, but there's so much undertow there. There's so much comment with restriction. he's you can feel the emotion behind it. It's just like Beethoven. It's the emotion is just so clear and so thick, and that's what you feel. I mean, with this complex vocabulary, that's what I think I respond to is music that has such great purpose with with a vocabulary that is well studied.
And one more classical composer that you really enjoy.
Beethoven.
Now,
Straight down.
all three periods, or is there a particular period that you like?
Oh, I mean, I mentioned his late string quartets. There's something there. What was his line? And this was music that was written for the generation
Yep.
past him. How he said it.
What piece, or so you like the late string quartets a lot? Do you have a particular one in mind, and like a movement or something?
The Great Fugue. I mean, talk about patience. I mean, just patience to make one simple motive last for so long with such angst all the way through. It's pretty amazing. And and I always go back to the piano sonatas as well. There again, because of the emotive quality of it. You could be the most beginning piano player and play those pieces, and you can't play it without without going deep into your own emotions. It's such a human experience to listen to Beethoven. But I think I actually those piano sonatas and the string quartets are the ones that I seem to go back to more than even the symphonies.
Now, when you were in college, you mentioned in an interview that you wrote all the time for other people's recitals. And could you just describe, perhaps just take an example of one student's recital? Like, what would you write for them? And would it be really anything?
I knew that, for me to be a writer, I just needed to write all the time. So I would approach everybody about writing, a piece for the recital as an example. I remember writing a piece for viola. And I think it was a duet. What did I write it for? I don't remember, but I didn't know what I was doing. I just wrote the music that was inside my head, and then tried to, when I didn't know what to do, then I would I would study some formal structures that seemed to work, and then try and follow those, that framework. But yeah, for flute and oboe and piano. Piano was the hard one because, how do you write a piano concerto? I mean, not a sonata. But I would listen to a lot of, the great composers that I knew about to model after, and then try and just let it go through my own filter and use vocabulary and language that I knew. So a lot of it was jazz influenced, of course. And I think that's part of, the performers. I think they enjoyed that too, that it was, coming from, I didn't apologize for being, jazz influenced.
When you used to write when you were younger, now of course, you're doing it all in your head. But when you were younger, did you use the piano or use instruments to perhaps sound out harmonies?
Sure. And I still do. The one thing, and just in terms of concept, in terms of writing, I wasn't, and still am not good enough on the piano to really hear everything that I'm hearing in my head. So I'm really cautious about the hunting and pecking approach, because perhaps I'm hearing, perhaps the melody's already in place, and then I'm hearing a particular harmony or even, a progression underneath it. And then once I start putting my hands down to chordal structures and places that I may be more familiar with my hands and my technique, once I've played those chords, then it's hard for me to hear the purity of what was already there in my head. So what I'll do is I'll just try and hear one note at a time and be really honest about it. And I'll try and maybe it's just the bass notes. Okay, are these really the bass notes that I'm hearing at this moment? I'll sing it, and then I'll make sure that's what it is. And then I'll just try and hear one other note. And so sometimes, especially, jazz players will perhaps write more dense of a harmony than what's really needed, just because it's a default. So I'm just trying to stay away from default setting. So, I mean, there's nothing more beautiful than an open fifth or a triad. Remember triads? Uh, and just switching that bass note so it's in different inversions and completely changes the harmony. In terms of harmony, if you're dealing with Western harmony, I look at it as a in a very simple way. So you're going to define a tonic. Then you're going to define there are only two tonics. There's only major and minor, and or if it's something else, then it's modal or it's non-tonal. So you're setting up major, minor, and then you're going to set that up with a subdominant chord and a dominant chord, and then there. So there are a lot of different ways you can say subdominant. If you're going to a major key, subdominant can be basically anything that wants to fall down. It's going to be a 2 chord, it's going to be a 4 chord, it's going to be a 6 chord. And then between the 2 chord and the 6 chord, they're a little bit weaker of resolutions. And the 4 chord is a little bit stronger, right? So how strongly do you want it to resolve to the dominant chord? And then for the dominant chord, okay, it's going to have anything that has a leading tone in it. Or you know what? That 3 minor chord actually has the leading tone in it. If you're in the key of C, E minor. So that if you have B, that would be, if you want something to be so subtly leading to the 1, why not a 3 chord? So I think about things like that where it's more melodic as opposed to just harmonic. I think about every melody inside every
So you
chord.
definitely think of melody a lot.
Absolutely.
Can you give it like a writing exercise? If you were to talk to your younger self and you said, you now with all your experience, and you could say, all right, I want you to do this exercise. How would you do that? Like what would be a great exercise for a younger version of yourself?
Yeah, it depends on the stage that you're at. You're always trying to balance intuition and cognition. You're always balancing method and creativity. So I would first just make everyone aware of that, so we don't get too burdened by any one side. So you have to go back and study counterpoint. That's the first thing. It's go through species counterpoint. Learn to write, 2 parts without the parallel fifths and with it, with the appropriate appoggiaturas, etc. And then study Bach and look at 4-part writing. I mean, those are the tools of everything we write after.
But you mentioned you're very self-taught. Did you teach yourself that? Is that something that you grabbed a book and tried to teach yourself?
No, I mean, it's something that was introduced to me in college. My first year in college, I remember my professor, who I know very well now, Mark Carlson, he introduced counterpoint to us, and I went, whoa, this is awesome. And then I saw all the parallels in jazz harmony, and I went, okay, you call it this, and we call it this, got it. But every note meant a little bit more, with a more specific language and counterpoint. So then I took that and ran with it and created perhaps my own system with it, where it was more applicable to what I was doing.
Describe your system.
It's something where, I'm so far away from writing any kind of method or book about what I do because so much of it is intuitive as well. But I think what I was talking about before in terms of harmony, it's a very melodic approach. I think about all tendency tones as resolving somewhere in a chord, and it's not necessarily about any particular home, resting place. It's just about something that's active and charged, like it's got one electron to give, and then it either explodes or it resolves, and the explosion is the resolution too. But then I'm reverent to the past and the way that the overtone series works. And there's just a certain sacred, it's physics, the way that the overtone series works by itself.
How conscious are you of the overtones, and how does that play into your writing?
I don't think about it so consciously. It's something I do. It comes up from time to time when it piques my ears or my interest. I'm conscious how we move from key to key and, upper structures, how the order of where upper structures are created on top of the triad and in terms of a hierarchy of a key, where that open fifth or the octave on the bottom is the foundation for everything that fits on top of it. So in terms of orchestration, when you're going to double things, or when certain ingredients are missing, it might feel top heavy because you don't have a grounding in terms of the overtone series. Your open fifth on the bottom, your triad on the bottom isn't strong enough. I'll think about this.
I want to go back to your playing because you were a finalist at the Thelonious Monk competition. You won the Herb Alpert Award, the National Trumpet Competition. Through all this time, you were also playing some serious trumpet. So, who are your favorite trumpet players?
Miles Davis has been the guiding beacon for me. I love his sound and his time and his approach, but I think topping the list of my admiration for him is just the way that he would lead bands and his minimalist, no BS approach to music. I mean, he looked for the skeleton of what the meaning of the music was, and got to the point and stripped everything down to to have its full meaning.
Which albums for you really you loved his playing on?
Well, everything. So I'll tell you, I remember telling this story to someone recently. I remember my dad put on Sketches of Spain when we lived in Oklahoma. So I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old. And he put on Sketches of Spain, and Dad pointed out to me how, Miles was playing in the low register with such reserve and control, and how expressive it was. And I just remember listening to the rest of the record and just, that's definitely one of those goosebumps moments on the way that he was interacting with the orchestra. Was certainly an impactful thing for me, because here it was, this classical influenced music with a jazz improvisational approach on top of it. I mean, that was amazing. They both coexisted. So that and then all the Gil Evans.
What did you think of Gil Evans's arrangements? Did you take a look at them?
Yeah, we did here at Frost. We did Porgy and Bess, and so I got to see the full scores, and what an amazing treat that was. After hearing the record, so many times for so many years, and then you see the scores, it's like, oh, that's how I got that sound, and the alto flutes and the two bass clarinets. And
yeah, could you name a couple of things from Porgy and Bess that score? What stood out to you from that score?
Everything. I mean, it's the way that he had the tuba in there, the French horns, the instrumentation, of course, but then it's also evenly balanced and also in control. There's nothing that's pushing the envelope in a sense of pushing the instruments over the top, but it's also purposeful. Every note's there. You can't take a note out. Every note has to be there. Very minimal, just like Miles in that way. And it's so informed by classical Western music.
Could you talk about two other trumpet players that you really dug?
Don Cherry. He would definitely be one. I remember I put on The Shape of Jazz to Come, Ornette Coleman, and I just laughed for about an hour in joy, because that's the way that I heard music too. It was expression, it was sounds, it was not restricted to any kind of a grid, even though there was a grid there and there was form there. It was clearly, well thought out in terms of the landmarks, the trajectory of the music. But the way that Don Cherry played over that, it was just so and fearless, so fearless to be able to, but the time was so good too. So Don Cherry is definitely Miles, and maybe Chet Baker. There's something about the lyric way of him playing and the way that he sings, the way that he plays, the way that he sings. I really respect that, and not trying to prove anything. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but it sounds like it was just all about the music to me. I never got to meet any of those individuals I just mentioned, but
your dad was a professional musician. Did he introduce you to any people, any big names when you were young?
Yeah, I mean, I got to hang out with Shelly Manne and Chuck DeMonico and a lot of the LA session folks, John Guerin, Bill Perkins. They were they were all uncles to me. Amazing people.
Did you ask them questions? Were you the kind of person who would just ask lots of questions about music?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't when I was really young. I would just kind of be a fly on the wall, really. But I hear them talk about music business stuff more than anything, or complain about the business. When I was late, Bill Perkins and John Guerin, they played in my band, in my big band, and so I'm definitely a person that hangs back and just listens and observes and immerses more than aggressively asking questions. But I would definitely, I remember asking Chuck DeMonico about playing with Monk, and they all had their own experiences playing those musics, which I would take and digest. And it told me, I mean, I think sometimes we tend to put a lot of these musicians on a pedestal, which they should certainly, we're reverent to where this music comes from, but they also were human beings and going through a lot of the same challenges and struggles that current musicians go through.
I want to talk about Kaleidoscope and Wobbly Dance Flower. Let's do this. I'm going to mention a track from the albums, and then could you just give me whatever comes to mind at this moment? So let's start with Good Day Sunshine. What comes to mind for you from that recording on your album Kaleidoscope? Renee Olstead sang on that.
Yeah, Renee is awesome. I knew she'd deliver the way that she did. She's so soulful and such a natural musician. And of course, that tune and the other track that she sang on, Do You Want to Know a Secret, has a lot of time signature changes and key changes and, a lot of weaves and bobs in the music. And she just navigated everything so naturally and again, so soulfully. And Tom Peterson on tenor saxophone too. He just gives it all of his heart. Every note he plays, he just gives it all of his heart. A true veteran.
Now, how about And I Love Her, the second track?
Yeah, I always loved that melody, as I'm sure the rest of the world does. And I really wanted to find a new way to harmonize it that took it even a little bit deeper. So I was playing around with those minor major 7 chords and descending bass lines and more of an orchestral instrumentation with the strings and woodwinds. And then I just tried to play it, like I was telling her that I loved her all the way through, so that it was just emotionally charged all the way through.
How about It's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?
Yeah. John Lennon, man.
Oh, yeah. Who's your favorite Beatle?
Oh, they're all just different personalities. And that's the special thing. I mean, I'm not trying to give a political answer, but I really think it was some sort of, it's the chemistry between the 4 of them that created what it was. That certain chemistry, especially between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Goodness. But John Lennon's just not scared to just go to some random chord and some random word, and who cares? And the irreverence is just awesome. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to. There, I got the piccolo trumpet involved because I had to have a piccolo trumpet in this suite, and it certainly has more classical influences at the top and those English double tongue trumpets in the back, and then it ends with the wailing guitar battle at the end. And I figured, why not slow it down here and do the key changes and just take us on a journey, which Lucy in the Sky should take us on.
How about Here Comes the Sun?
Well, Here Comes the Sun, again, I just love the melody. That George Harrison melody is divine. And, it opens up. I don't know if you can hear it. There's actually a sun gong in the back, which resonates at a B natural, a very low B. So that's why cool. It's in the key of B instead of A. And then the wind chimes are at the top, like the sun creates the wind, and that's blowing the wind chimes. And the flutes almost become the chimes themselves as wind is blowing through them as well. And then just singing that melody, I tried to play it as if I was just singing every word. And then, going into those Indian 5s and 7s of the bridge, as George Harrison took us, and I just tried to go to the next level of it, making it, just a little bit even more complex as we are in a different era now. And then bringing it back, and I wanted to play the EVI on it because I think it's a little bit more outer space. just to take us all the way to the sun and perhaps back, and just a feeling of joy. I wanted to express a feeling.
Now, you had another featured vocalist on. I saw her standing there. You had Katis Buckingham.
Yeah, Katis. Katis and I grew up together in Southern California, and he's such a talented spoken word artist and saxophone player. He's playing saxophone and doing the rap on there. And I asked him to write something that had his lyrics are usually of some spiritual background and some global ideas that all human beings should hear about, and it's all very positive. So I wanted him to write some lyrics that kind of went along with everything. So, and his time is so good. His time is impeccable. I mean, he's a musician's musician. So I knew I had to have him do something on there.
Talk about Michelle now. That's a very beautiful tune. What was your approach to arranging that?
I chose to choose a lot of songs where you just know you're going to know the melody so well. And that's not a difficult task with the Beatles catalog. But, Michelle's just one of those melody-driven songs. So it was a balance thing where I knew if the melody was so strong, then I had the license to really take one other element like rhythm and really stretch it and play with it. So speaking of Ornette Coleman, the rhythm is all free. It's almost like Lonely Woman. And then I was thinking, well, what if Michelle was a lonely woman? and we put those things together. That's why they're the little solo alto parts in the middle it's kind of like Ornette Coleman chanting on his alto saxophone in the back in the middle of those melodies. And then there's a yearning and a screaming in the middle, right, where it becomes that free jazz moment. And then finally it all comes together where we play these unison figures as across the orchestra for a while, and then it breaks down again too. And so I think Michelle is still perhaps a bit lonely toward the end, but it's got a at peace resolution by the time we get to the very end.
Now talk about the very interesting Kaleidoscope Eyes medley. I mean, it's not as long as the other pieces, but you jam in a lot of content there.
I did. I had a list of all these tunes that I wanted to cover, and I just ran out of space to put them all. So I said, well, I'm going to do a little medley here because they're little pieces that I so clearly hear that I want to melt down and arrange. So I just found a way to, I had to do it with a little help from my friends because this project was so special in that way that, so many people came together because it was just about the music. It was just about the music. And we just wanted to come together as a community to do this. So it was so much bigger than any one individual. So when I'm playing there, I'm thinking about everybody that was involved in that project. And then we just take this tour on a little medley of other things I wanted to do with Beatles medley, Beatles classics, and I wanted to give a little space for Gene Coy to play a drum solo, and then to finish off with the chaos day in the life at the end there. I thought would be really fun.
The album ended with a reprise of Good Day Sunshine. Could you talk about that really brief 2-minute reprise?
That was a last minute decision because it actually, Good Day Sunshine, when we do it live, the reprise is actually at the end of the main track, and that's how we did it live. But when we put out the record, we felt like it was too long that way, so we just ended it with the end of the vocal, and then we thought it'd be a fun way to just bookend it and put it at the end of the record, just as a little, we're not done yet.
A great album, and congratulations for those nominations. I wonder how you felt when you. How do you like, what happens? Do you get like an email or a letter comes to you? How do you know?
No, you get about 1,000 text messages. I remember I was driving, in Miami, I was driving up north for something, and I saw my phone was just exploding. What the hell is going on? And then I saw, my wife called, and so I picked that up, and she told me that someone had told her that those nominations came in. So I was pleased to hear it from her first.
Now, I want to end off by talking about your latest album, Wobbly Dance Flower, and let's go through the tracks. Let's start with Miss Turkey on Wobbly Dance Flower, your 2017 release.
Yeah. Miss Turkey. Well, I had done this recording session in Belgium, and it was right adjacent to a turkey farm. And so we every time you would open the glass doors just to get some air, there was this chain link fence there with I don't know how many hundreds of turkeys. And you open the glass door and they all go. I was always impressed by the volume and interesting sound that those turkeys get. So, I mean, I was coming up with this little alternate fingering sound between the saxophone and the trumpet, and it kind of sounded like a turkey to me. So, but that was something I sang in my phone. That this whole record, I knew it was coming up, and we had the recording dates, and I had written nothing. So I wrote everything. It's very riff oriented. We did blues and rhythm changes and understandable vocabulary. And I sang a lot of it just in my phone just the week before the sessions. And so it's very organic in that way.
Now, normally Donnelly is taken, like everybody likes to play it super fast, but you actually took it down to a cooler, more mellow tempo. Could you talk about that version of Donnelly on the album?
Yeah. Well, there's that controversy, right, of who actually wrote it. Was it Bird or was it Miles Davis? But I thought it would be fun to do it slow a la Miles with the harmon mute in thinking like he wrote it in that era, and slowing everything down, cool jazz style. And then, but the reason why I wanted to do it too was because of Bob Mintzer, because, one of my first inspirations was hearing him play Donnelly with Jaco Pastorius on the bass clarinet. And so I didn't want to do a recording with Bob Mintzer without getting to do that with him, my own guilty pleasure. So then we took it up double time when he was playing. But it's also just a bit of a sense of humor with me too, because, I've always wanted to make a record with all bebop tunes that are usually really fast and just do them as slow as I possibly could.
Yeah. Now, Be
Free. There's a little bit of that.
Be Free has a bit of a calypso vibe to it. Can you talk about Be Free?
Yeah. It was just one of those melodies that popped into my head, and I sang it in my phone and in about 3 seconds and said, well, let's just go for it. It's kind of silly. But I figured it'd be a nice thing to do as a free jazz kind of thing. And we were playing with organ. Joe Baggs playing Hammond B3, and so instead of B3, it's Be Free. The feel just became naturally what it became. I didn't give any direction with the feel. That's Gene Coy and just what the tune lends itself to do.
Now, Brooklyn Still, nice, beautiful, slow, gorgeous kind of tune. Now, Bob Mintzer, to talk about Brooklyn Still, how that recording and how you came to do that piece.
Well, that's actually one of the tunes that I had written a while ago. And actually, one of my bandmates just walked in the door from here in Miami. We played it together, Zach Larmer, before. I had done a session in LA for a movie, and we redid a Van Morrison tune. I couldn't tell you the tune now, but I remember it had 3 sections. There was, and they were all exactly the same 8-bar phrase, just in different keys. And so I had this little motif in my head, and I just didn't think that it needed anything else. So I just put it in 3 different keys and just let it travel the universe in that way. And then I really loved, there's this play between the even eighth notes and the triplet on that everybody's playing with. And it's quite the task to decide if we're going to be on the swing side of it or we're going to be on the even side of it. But when I listen to it, I think of, when we play that live, I usually say that, the culture that we live in right now is just so fast paced and there's so much information coming to us at any given moment. Internet, news, text messages, as you can hear from this interview, 1,000 emails and text. you need to be able to shut it down and slow life down a little bit. And so, and hear the thoughts in between the thoughts. And that's what that song does for me.
Now, Wobbly Dance Flower, I mean, your daughter has an influence on the album, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she was 6 years old at the time. And, as that week where I was starting to write some of these things, and I told her, Hada, I'm writing this song and I just can't think of the right title. And without blinking an eye, she said, "Oh, Daddy, call it Wobbly Dance Flower." and I thought that was the most brilliant thing I'd ever heard. And then she had tune that just fit what the tune was, because the tune's pretty silly and dancey and playful, I guess is the best word. And then that became the name of the record. And she actually drew all the illustrations on the record, and so it was really fun to get to collaborate with her. Now she's she's a famous graphic artist now.
Great. Now Jazz Heads has got that nice swing to it. So talk about Jazz Heads.
Yeah, that's also another kind of silly tune. Bob, of course, is the head of jazz studies at Thornton School of Music at USC, and now I'm the chair of studio music at jazz and at the Frost School of Music, University of Miami. So we're both these jazz heads, right? And
that's
the beginning of that tune, it's just got this friendly, playful jaunt to it, and I could just imagine some 70s TV show with Bob and I, both getting an ice cream together in the in the beginning credits, and then just opening up and blowing. So I just wanted to write something that was playful. The whole record is playful.
Now, Meet Me at the Airport, that's a blues, right?
Yeah, I had to have one blues on there. Yeah, both Bob and I and the modern life for musicians is you're going to be in the airport a lot. So, as I said, I wrote a lot of these things on the plane or in airports, and but there's a certain taking off feeling with the organ at the beginning. You can almost see a airplane taking off. Yeah, and then I could imagine, like in the 1960s, just showing up into that convertible Cadillac to the Miami airport, getting the bags and taking off to Bora Bora.
Yeah, talk about You Got a Puppy Now. Everything is starting to really go to a breakneck speed.
Yeah, that one's deceptively hard because it's fast and it's got these 5-bar phrases which are really awkward to blow over. You can't play anything that you preconceive, that's for sure. You have to stay inside what those 5-bar phrases are. But my daughter was FaceTiming with my parents, her grandparents, and she said, "Daddy, they got a puppy." And I thought, I didn't think they actually got a dog, maybe a stuffed animal or something, but they had just gotten a puppy. And this whole tune, it reminds me of that feeling when you see a puppy just running around with that puppy energy. It sounds exactly like that tune. So
finally, extra credit is like it's a rhythm changes, right?
Yeah, it's just straight up rhythm changes. I was just this all came together so fast, and I had to create music where we could just come in and play without a rehearsal and without too much discussion. And I also wanted to create something where Bob and I, we both, another parallel with us is that we both play the electric wind instrument. And so I figured we could do something really short that just has us play together, playing this these outer space music instruments.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate talking to you. I hope you had a good time talking to me today.
I absolutely did. I appreciate you having me on. I hope that it's fun for the audience, and hopefully we got to some places where it's helpful to people.
Oh, yeah. It's just so great to ask you all these questions about writing and all those things. What's next lined up for you for the rest of the year?
Well, a bunch of stuff. We're playing a 3-night residency in LA Memorial Weekend at our home base at the Baked Potato. Looking forward to that. We're finishing our next large jazz ensemble project, which is just a beast. It's going to be amazing. It's coming out in September. So we're mixing and mastering that as we speak. And so many other things. I might even take a nap in June. I'm looking forward to that too.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. My audience really appreciates it. And thanks for sharing all your experience and your knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with the great John Daversa. What a privilege to talk to such a respected musician. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes. It would mean a lot to me. Thanks again, and I'll see you at the next show.